November is Hip Hop History Month. After celebrating hip hop's 50th anniversary this year, we have created our new hip hop collection to showcase the history and culture of hip hop with pictures, videos, conversations, and more. Visit digitalarchives.queenslibrary.org to explore QPL's hip hop collection, and be sure to visit queenslibrary.org to check out our hip hop programs in November. Queens Public Library is proud to participate in this year's New York Cares Coat Drive. This citywide initiative aims to collect over 100,000 coats and distribute them to New Yorkers who need them the most this winter. You can donate new and gently used winter coats for children and adults at 14 QPL locations from November 1st through December 31st during our regular hours of service. Visit queenslibrary.org to learn more. Let's have some Thanksgiving fun at the library. Join us in the days leading up to the holiday for arts and crafts, concerts, movies, and more. Visit the QPL calendar at queenslibrary.org to see all our virtual and in-person Thanksgiving programs.
Hello, virtual audience, wherever you may be. I am Eli Moss, and I'm here with Mariam and Naveed. And we are so excited to be here tonight for this annual event with the Queens Public Library. And it's in collaboration with the International Annual Indie Author Day. I'm really excited to be back with the Queens Public Library for, I think it might be my 7th year doing this. And it's always such a pleasure to work with Eve and Gennady and everyone at the Queens Public Library. So we want to just start by giving great thank yous to the branch and their staff, and also just to library workers in New York City and beyond. Librarians are essential workers and do incredible, valuable, important work for all of us. We're going to start out just with a couple of access notes and a land acknowledgement. Just so you know, YouTube will automatically create closed captions and transcripts for this. So if that is something that you need, that will be available to you, and this program will also be archived. I'm just going to start out with a visual description for myself, and then Mariam will do the same. I am a white non-binary person. I am wearing dark green glasses that are slightly reflective and a sort of orange beret. I have on a wool sort of tweed brown jacket and a white and black scarf. Behind me, there is a high bookshelf and other various scholarly things. Mariam will also introduce themselves, at least in a visual description. We'll give you bios in a little bit.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Mariam. I am a brown olive skinned person, a woman with a child on a very restless child. So forgive me if my concentration is distracted. I am wearing a flannel, I guess it's like a bluish gray and brown color with a black shirt underneath. I'm sitting on a blue tweed couch, and behind me is a window. It's very dark outside, so it looks black. There's a shelf with lots of things protruding out of it, papers and plants, and my child.
Yes.
Wearing a blue shirt and looking right-eyed.
Yes, exactly. Hi, Naveed. So very quickly, a land acknowledgement for both of us and for the library. The Queen's Public Library System is located on, and I, Eli, am based in Lenape-Hokiig, the unceded land of the Munsee Lenape, Canarsie, Mattaqua, Rockaway, and Maspeth peoples, whereas Miriam joins us from what is now known as New Haven, a region stewarded for generations by Mohegan, Manchetucket, Pequot, Shawgatoke, Golden Hill, Pagosset, Neontic, and the Quinnipiac, and other Algonquin-speaking peoples. Sorry, I haven't read those out loud necessarily before, the Connecticut Indigenous folks. So we ask you to join us in acknowledging these communities, their elders, both past and present, as well as future generations, and acknowledging and working towards Indigenous rights all over the world, across the globe. So we are so happy to be here with you tonight, and our event this evening is Collective Publishing and Public Action in Uncertain Times, and these are, if ever, uncertain times. And so I will just ask Miriam to give you a little intro to who she is, and then I will do the same for myself.
Sure. So where to start? I mean, I'm a poet, an educator. I am a researcher in predominantly American ethnic studies. I do a lot of work on race and culture in the Americas in the 20th century. And beyond that, I'm also part of a collective of Central American artists and writers called Tierra Narrative, where I've done a few curatorial projects that have really been organized around bringing together artists in the Central American diaspora and the, we refer to it as the Isthmus, but the region. So what else to add? I do a lot of teaching virtually. I lead a lot of different workshops in the summers, especially that really bring critical and creative writing practices together. And actually, I started that through Eli's project, The Operating System, or started doing that for the first time with The Operating System.
Yeah.
Also published my first chapbook.
Yes, a really long time ago, over 10 years ago now, right? Wasn't it around 10 years ago now?
Yeah,
probably?
Yeah, it's about 10 years. Yeah,
amazing. Yeah, and so I'm Eli Moss. I am a research-based artist, social practice artist, information worker. I also do a lot of facilitation. I'm sort of moving away from the word of education, which I feel is sort of problematic, but we do some education such as it is. We both work at this time in academia. I teach at both Pratt and at Bennington College, where I am I'm in my second year of being a fellow in the Center for the Advancement of Public Action there. At this time, my project publication as Public Action, Archive and Access is something that I'm working on and is installed in the library there. And some of my students from that class may be with us tonight because we are working very much on these topics. So I'm really excited that we're here tonight. And as Miriam says, we have known each other, well, I mean, for a really long time now. I don't, longer than that. We have collaborated in a variety of ways. And I know that we've also just spoken, for a long time over the years about, the challenges of the things that we personally do creatively in the world and doing those things in a public and doing those things in complex political and cultural landscapes where you're often sort of, on the fence between sort of reinforcing systems and structures that we don't necessarily love while also wanting to give information and access and tools to all sorts of people. And so I know for both of us, we have moved across a variety of landscapes and platforms and methodologies to do that. And to bring it back to sort of like the relationship to the indie author, right? Who is the indie author in this landscape? Who is the indie publisher in this landscape? And why is why are these two things and also the intersection of those two things and libraries, why is that so important right now? And kind of how have we negotiated a change, a growing and evolving understanding of what that was going to look like for us and other people? So I guess I'm I'm sort of asking a hypothetical question, which now became a real question. So do you want to respond to that?
I mean, I will try. Yeah, I mean, I guess when I think about indie authorship and the relationship to libraries, I the first thing I think about is just like my formation as a writer,
Right.
and the importance of library spaces. I mean, I grew up in Texas, where and this was years ago before a lot of this repression and yeah, very targeted repression of public libraries and schools really took place. But even there, within schools, what we had access to reading was really limited. But yeah, public libraries were really crucial, I think, to my intellect, my creative formation, my learning outside of out of sight of school in general. It's where I found a lot of poetry for the first time because poetry wasn't something that we really
Had in
had
the
a lot
house.
of. Yeah,
Yeah.
like we're in the house, right? And also speaking as the child of immigrants who did not speak English. Yeah, I mean, I guess that's just where my first thought lands. But also the library as a resource for things like, I mean, it's also where, as a young person, you go and spend, or at least for me as a young person, it's where you go and spend your free time. It's where you go and make things.
Absolutely. I've been working with librarians up in the sort of capital region and in Vermont. And one of the public librarians from the Free Library in Bennington said to me this summer, and I love this. She said, we're really trying to help more people understand that the library is a portal and not a box. I was like, ooh, this is fantastic. Because exactly, right? I think for me, for you, for so many of us, like the library for me was not a container. It was a doorway, right? I mean, and I think it actually is like through my really positive experiences sort of with libraries and to a certain extent with school that offered me things that my working class family, my mom went to college and then was in grad school when I was in school. So a lot of the time I spent in libraries as a kid was when my mom was in school and I would go with her and she would sit me in a library like at Bank Street College for Education. And I would just like wander around the library for a couple of hours when my mom was in school, you know what I mean? So and then I spent a lot of time in the Brooklyn Public Library growing up, like doing programs like Riff, where like if you read a book, they'd give you a book. And it was like reading is fundamental, right? And so that's how we were able to afford books often was like through the library even. And so I think that it was fundamental to who I became and for you as well, like this understanding of the library as sort of this portal space. And, I find myself thinking and talking over and over again about sort of the idea in Hooks's theory as a liberatory practice, right? That like that she came to ideas, to theory, to books because she was like hurting. That's literally the phrase that she uses. And because it offered her something that she really needed when her family did not have that for her as a certain kind of curious person, as a creative person, as a thinking person who was like interested in having certain understandings of the world. She found in these ideas a thing that was really necessary and feeding to her. And I think that for me in books, even though now I really think about whether I have even in myself, because it was what we grew up with, like I'm going to be 45. So it's a little bit of it's different from now, like the oral tradition, which preceded the book. I've now kind of gone back to being like, maybe I want to rethink sort of the primacy of the book as the method of communication and what I love so much, but it's what I had, Yeah. Yeah. Thoughts?
Yeah.
That wasn't a question.
No, it's fine. It's fine. No, I mean, I'm just thinking back to your point on the library as portal and just being a site of access for so many different things. And yeah, talk about like, also just to go back to the point of like indie publishing, I feel like in New York especially, I mean, I think of places like, I mean, this isn't, a private institution, but the Barnard College Library having this huge zine collection that's
really, yeah. Pratt does too.
A doorway to so many things. Yeah, yeah. Right. Pratt actually has a really fantastic indie publishing collection from what I remember.
They have an
Um,
incredible zine collection. And, my artists, my students there for the last couple of years, I've had them making zines, but even my senior fine arts majors, they've been at Proud for 4 years. I introduced them to the zine collection, which they didn't know was there. I mean, and so it's, some of it is, I think, to sort of bring it around to the idea of sort of like, why is indie publishing, why is sort of the relationship between indie publishing, indie writing, and the library so important right now in these like uncertain times, right? It's sort of like, I guess the way that I had framed it, or the way that I've been thinking about it, is like, what is the role of the writer, the publisher, the book, the library, the archive, and also, like, importantly, like access to these things, right? Like we just both mentioned private library collections, but like making sure they're in public libraries, and also like the distribution of materials, as we consider like who gets to participate in and also then like benefit from these different sort of forms of what's ultimately what I think of as like meaning making in the world, right? So the writer, the publisher, the book, the library, how do we think about these as like tools of meaning making in human history, like not even in contemporary history, just like as something that we as humans do?
Yeah. I mean, these are all interlinked, of course, like, right, the writer publishes things, ideally the book ends up in the library, and then the library distributes the book or circulates the book to the wider public. I guess like right now, I'm just thinking, I forget if you just asked this out loud, but I'm looking at the notes that you shared with me, and like, yeah, just thinking about the relevance of all of this right now in this moment, and to really think about, the stakes of meaning making at a time when, right, like access to information is really being challenged in so many ways. Access to the way we understand truths, the way that powerful institutions control, essentially the way narratives are formed. I guess like I'm thinking about the stakes of all the interconnectedness of this. Like I think when I see all of these things happening, it reminds me, I'm like, oh yes, we really need to reinvest. I mean, not even reinvest, but like those of us who are invested, we really need to kind of double down on our investments. Like I'm thinking, yeah, myself as a writer and as somebody who's published with small presses, I mean, we really need to like care for our public institutions, our public.
Absolutely. I mean, and this is why, and I've said for years, and I will say it over and over, and it's what my project, what my program that I'm doing right now is called, is like the focus on archive and access as opposed to like publishing and sales is so critical for me. And I've really sung this song for a long time, because part of what I've always said is I'm like, look, if there's only going to be 10 copies of your book in the world, we hope that there's more, but if there's only going to be 10, it is a far better fate for those books to be in libraries than it is than anything else that could possibly happen. So like when someone is thinking, and this is like, the idea of the indie author, the indie publisher, really strategically about how something that they make, even if they have extremely little money, can have the most impact. You say to your friend, please go to your local library and ask them to order this. Please go to your academic library, anyone you have a teacher, and ask them to order this. Don't buy it. Also, like we're never going to solve the problems that we have by trying to buy things into survival. Like we cannot. It's impossible for us to do this. And so better for all of us to have that copy than for one of us to have that copy, right? And so it's sort of like, as we think about, how many of these can I afford to make? How many of these do I need to make? What is my goal? Is it readership, right? And so I think when you're thinking about the sort of meaning-making act of the thing, you say, all right, I'm probably not going to have a career as a writer. And this isn't said because to like, shatter anyone's dreams. It's just like from a statistical point of view, just statistical analysis, and I'm a very logic-driven person, like it is extremely highly unlikely for most people who publish books to actually support themselves on the sales of the books alone, especially given the increasing volume of books that come out, right? It's actually not a wise bet, even just from a fiscal perspective, to stake your future on making money from your book. So it's almost like if that happens, nice surprise, that's gravy. But if you really want your work to get out there, like this kind of idea where you're sort of like, what is my goal? Who do I want to have this? How can I make that happen? Thinking about archives and libraries and also sort of like digital repositories like the Internet Archive, or with the OS, we have, you know, an online open access library of everything we've ever published, encouraging people, especially in educational settings and community settings and jails, et cetera, to use these things freely, to print them out, distribute them as long as they're not making money off of them. Absolutely encouraging that, because it almost frees you from like restricting the possibilities of your work because you're trying to make money off of it, which is like impossible. So it's almost like we're in the wrong stakes. And, you know, libraries are so amazing in this way because they often have very deep ties to their communities and are very excited to have holdings of local work, right? So actually local libraries often will accept local authors who self-publish, which is a thing that I don't think that everybody really knows. They might think, oh, my library won't accept it. But actually, if you're like from the community, a library is often really excited and they'll promote it. They'll be like, local author.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it also reminds me of just like how, at least in my case, you know, local libraries are also very eager to host local authors who want to do educational projects.
Absolutely.
You know, I mean, don't expect necessarily money from it unless there's a budget for it. But, you know, say you wanted to offer a workshop and just bring people together, or like a reading group, right? It's so easy to just go to your, you know, librarians and say, hey, I would like to do this.
The wild thing is that that's even possible at larger libraries than you think. Like I've held events and workshops and, public, sort of art events and stuff at the Brooklyn Public Library's main branch in Grand Army Plaza. People might think like, oh, that's just for, famous people, or actually, no, you can totally book one of their rooms or like work with them. They're super excited to do that. And it's sort of like that permission granting. It just changes the way that you feel.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, I just gave a talk at the library and all these people came and I didn't know any of them before. And now they know who I am. And maybe they did buy my book, right? If you like have a thing, right? So like if you're making connections in your community, you're bringing people in, you're running a poetry workshop, then I don't know, you wrote your own book and you've got a couple of their people are, who just took a free workshop from you, buy your book, totally happens.
Yeah. I mean, it makes me think also of like, right, like we are taken by surprise by this because we're so used to moving through private institutions, like whether those are like places, right, like private owned businesses or just the universities in some cases. I just think, or like maybe not private, I want to say gate kept.
Yeah, sure.
And like we forget that the purpose of a public library is to open access and to be a community space. And then the other thing I was going to say about that, and maybe this takes us out of the library as a physical space, but like thinking about you talking about the operating system and making all of these texts open access, it makes me think, I mean, so much of the work that I've done, especially really since the pandemic, has been in the virtual space. So, I mean, pretty much all of my work, whether it's been reading or teaching or publishing, it's been in the virtual realm. So, I mean, yeah, talk about, I guess there's like a bigger question of like how we can always think about bringing these resources back into public libraries as well. But yeah, I guess the thing I'm really thinking about is the parallels between the internet as a virtual space for access and these public institutions that we physically move through. They kind of work together for me, I think.
Well, hilariously, actually, I think that very few people in my life were actually here for this, but you were there. Weren't you at Naropa with me when I gave my everyone poets should know how to code talk?
I think so.
I think you were there. So the hilarious thing is because I'm a weird, I'm a strange art person who's interested in open access software design and, GitHub and stuff like this. But I have been a person for so long who's kind of like, what's happening in open sort of software development and things like that is so exciting for the arts, right? And when I sort of started singing that song, which now was, I don't know, 15 years ago or something, even longer, people were extremely hesitant because there was such a, the idea that the physical, the tangible was like so much better, and there was such unfamiliarity and therefore sort of resistance to online spaces. But it's funny, and I gave a talk this weekend that mentioned this as well. As a person who like does queer and trans theory and also disability theory, online spaces for people in different communities have long been a place where freedom was possible that was not possible offline. And so even though for many people who don't experience those sorts of discrimination, they weren't moving into those spaces, this was actually happening for a lot of people in a lot of different communities that maybe was invisible. And so there's actually multiple timelines for when people became extremely comfortable in the online world, right? So like the idea that we have like, oh, this is new. For someone like me, like who started doing like a lot of online organizing and online sort of futurist conversations about what was possible, it also like in community design and things like that. And we were international groups of people. So in the mid 2000s, I was already on these like terrible Skype calls with people from all over, right? And so, for some of us, this is not a new, a new idea. And I don't remember if I mentioned this the other day, but even it's a complicated text, but I often will bring the temporary autonomous zone text from Hakim Bey like into conversations about this, because the language of autonomous zone is something that we often have now use based on that. But, he talks about in that text, like especially the early internet as assertive task, because
wait, sorry, can you explain what the autonomous zone is? Just
for
our audience? Yeah.
You want me to explain the autonomous zone for the audience?
You can do it.
I can, sure. So this text, which I think is from 1991, I want to say, it might be a little later, but he is talking about, this is Hakim Bey, and he's talking about kind of the history of autonomous sort of organizing. And we'll often now hear and I'll tell you a little bit about, I guess I can explain a little bit about sort of like the history of that. He'll go into anything from sort of pirates to tech culture to sort of, different sorts of like interdependent or informal networks, like culturally and socially through different historical groups. And he then sort of brings these ideas into how we might kind of organize. And so often sort of resistance groups or groups looking to sort of build alternative societies. And so we've seen this during protests, Occupy Wall Street. During the protests in 2020, they built an autonomous zone in Seattle. Yeah. And I think there was another one in the South. I can't remember where, but people will use this language. And so he talked about the internet as being that kind of space. And in my own research around, especially like queer and trans communities, like a lot of chat rooms and things like that, like allowed all people to take all sorts of genders on for years and years and years. Anyway, we have gone off the track, but I think that where I was going with that, to just bring it back to sort of the OS and Liminal Lab and online teaching, which online sort of versions of things with which Miriam was starting to talk about, sort of like how do we not assume or privilege a certain time of space versus another. And I think libraries are actually doing this incredibly well, like moving into a blend of digital humanities resources and physical resources. Yeah. I mean, how do you feel like that's happening in sort of public libraries near you that you know of, or even in academic libraries?
I would say more. I mean, I'm in a very privileged institution with a lot of money, so definitely there. I think it's a lot harder with my public library here in New Haven, I haven't seen that quite to the same extent. But I know that in New York, that this seems to be a little bit more within reach. I don't know. This is my sense of things. But anyway,
Yeah,
that's my answer.
yeah, I mean, I think from a lot of librarians and stuff that I talk to, it's sort of just the volume of things that libraries can now bring in. There is sort of a need for us as people making things, again, indie authorship, to be thinking about what libraries have capacity for. It's a capacity building and capacity sustaining question in a way, right? So are there going to be digital resources? Are they going to be physical resources? And I think like looking in a speculative way, sort of like towards the future of libraries, the future of practice, the future of education, right? Do we need to bring in this hybridity, right?
Yes.
And I think we've seen from so many of us who went online in COVID and, you know, in the disability community, there was such kind of relief and joy that suddenly access had become available, which then was taken away again, as opposed to like hybridizing. But I do think for some of us, we kept teaching, and you've started teaching some of your own classes. Do you want to talk a little bit about that sort of move? What that looks like?
Yeah. I mean, so in 2021, I taught my first virtual workshop with Liminal Lab, and the idea behind it was that, well, just a Liminal Lab in general, which was an extension of the operating system, is that people could teach whatever they wanted to teach in a very open access, like sliding scale way. If you couldn't afford a workshop, you could also just take it. I thought that was really exciting. I think most of us, or a lot of us, offered our classes asynchronously, so people didn't have to be taking them live online. They could take them on their own time, and we just share materials so that they could catch up and they'd watch the recordings.
I think you did a blended, like synchronous, asynchronous, right? I think most people did like not a fully asynchronous course, but like synchronous courses that had a lot of flexibility for people who needed to take them asynchronously.
Yeah. I mean, I like making the option where people can do them either way.
For sure.
Yeah. So, I mean, doing this in 2021, when we were still very much, you know, in, I don't know, not entirely, but in semi-lockdown mode. I mean, whatever you want to call lockdown. But I found it really exciting that I could just connect with people literally all over the world. There were people from everywhere. I had participants from Australia. I had people from Germany. And yeah, I think just being able to teach in that space compared to the traditional university classroom, I mean, for many reasons, was really exciting to me. But like just the kind of being able to bring people together with intention. The workshop I taught was called Poetics Against Possession. We're really trying to challenge like the idea behind the class was we were reading texts that challenged our relationships to ownership or controlling material things, or texts that were really interested in thinking through the unknowable. Yeah, I mean, we just had some really beautiful conversations in that space. And so I've continued to do that independently, offering workshops in this way, like, one, to make some income. Not that was the main.
Oh, I'm trying to see if I have the old listing for that class, and I do, and I'm going to put it in the chat here, and so people can.
I mean, it was, these workshops are helpful for me as an artist to make money.
And that was really the meaning behind creating Liminal Lab, right? Because I saw as like someone who ran an organization and that like in many ways had been focused on like planning events, public events, workshops in the world, and also publishing and then doing events around the books that we were making, that, a couple of things were happening, that so many people in our community were like gig-based workers, artists who were like losing all of these ways of being in the world, right? And like not having these platforms. And that at the same time, we had sort of like this global audience that was all at home, sort of hungry for community, hungry for connection, hungry for inspiration. And, I saw it simultaneously as a way for people to really like kind of find ownership in the possibility of like making and developing their own classes out of their ideas in a way, again, that was not gate capped, right? So for a lot of people who had mostly taught through university, it's like being told like, yep, you can run a thing. And I gave some templates for people who were very new, because otherwise it felt very overwhelming. It's sort of like, the what is it, like when choice totally shuts you down because there's too many choices. So it was like, maybe do a 6-week or a 4-week, maybe try this. But people were really excited by it. And I think, like Miriam said, we did like all sliding scale and really, prioritize making open source materials. And I know that for people like me, I also didn't cap my classes. And so like I think like at least one class that had like 30 something people in it, and I tried the same thing at Bennington this year. And it's actually interesting because it's in person, it's actually harder to do with that many people. Yeah. The online thing can scale in a way that it actually is difficult to translate back. Yes. And so I think similarly to what's happened with labor, with workers, moving into that digital space, which allowed so much flexibility and also was so kind of conducive to the needs of different bodies, families, workers, moving back away from hybridity. And I think for any of us teaching in institutions where the institutions are increasingly reticent to allow for online or hybrid teaching, I have been raising the flag for that. I think that, like just like it is in the workplace, we really need to embrace a hybridity. But how can we come back to indie authorship? Well, I think that the making of independent education spaces is a sort of authorship.
It is. Well, I mean, and also, we're talking about the writer in the world. What does a writer do? I mean, yeah, we create work that people read and engage and hopefully take something away from. But I also think writers, I mean, not everybody. I know teaching is not something that everybody wants to do, but for me, those things are so interconnected. And like, I would say that when I think about what my role is as a writer, as an author, the texts are just one way of me expressing myself. I mean, the work I really value is just being in community with people. This was what I was going to say, right? Like, yes, there's the income that comes with teaching a workshop independently, but like really the thing that excites me about doing that work virtually is that like I can, like a community comes to an idea that I have. I say like, hey, here's this idea I want to explore. You are welcome to participate in it. Let's read through these texts together and let's like work through some prompts together. It's not only creating a community around a writing practice, but or a set of texts. I mean, here's talk about another way we can bring indie authorship into this. Like, what are the texts that I actually teach? But
exactly.
You're building community around the platform. Actually, let me add that tangent. As pedagogues, whether we're working in virtual experimental space or in the classroom, like when we highlight independent authors, we are playing our role in like expanding the community of readership for the people that we're teaching. I mean,
I continuously teach books from the operating system. Yeah. I don't think I would like anything that I was excited to publish. I was equally excited to share. That's why I was excited to publish them. And all of them are incredible teaching books. It's so funny. As you were saying, what do I do as an author? What do I want my work to do? I was like, did you escape the OS Q&A? I think that you made your chapbook before that Q&A became a standard thing, didn't you? Or was there already a Q&A?
No,
I think it was too early. But you know this, right? So in every part of the Archive and Access thing was always that every author was asked to and invited to add a sort of thoughtful, almost essay style response to this Q&A. And it really was part of the, tell your story about your work and practice alongside your creative book so that it would be published together and go into the archive together so that it would not be someone else telling your story, just from like a historian sort of way for the archive. But one of my favorite questions was always like, what do you hope that your book does in the world? Like, what do you hope that you as like a creative person and this work Like, what do you hope for it to do now and in the future? Right. And I think that that's such an interesting question. The sort of like, which you've brought up, it's sort of like when we think about authorship or publishing or creative practice and all these different ways and the ways that it interfaces with maybe the making of an object, which, I use all these other words to talk about books, but it's because I try to even remind myself of all the things that it does that are not the sort of fetishized idea of what a book is. Right. So what a book does, right? It documents, it witnesses, it provides a tool, it provides a path. Right. And then how do we connect in that, how do we connect in relationship to that? And then that third question again becomes, how do we bring in the other platforms and infrastructures like the library that already exist?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Do we want to talk a little bit about our sort of work in community? And then I also realized I wanted to say something about the sort of like censorship and the library. But we don't have that much time left. Why don't you tell us just a little bit about sort of like how your work with sort of public programs and theater narrative like has been a space for you to work out some of these ideas?
Yeah, I mean, so the work I've done with Theater Narrative, like I said, we're a collective of Central American diaspora writers and filmmakers predominantly. But through that platform, I've co-curated transnational events with writers that bring together writers from the diaspora with writers in the region. So in 2021, this was also in COVID times. I mean, COVID's still ongoing, but like the deep COVID times. But we actually organized 3 programs with the Poetry Project. Maybe some people are familiar, but a really important and wonderful institution for poetry, especially experimental poetics here in New York City. So anyway, we did these 3 programs virtually, and what was really wonderful about that was that we were, we were able to bring together people from so many different places, as far as our readers were or performers, readers, whatever you want to call them, were concerned. But the other thing we were able to do was make our programs accessible in English and Spanish by working with a group of language justice practitioners who, not only did they translate on the spot the conversations we were having, but in the events that translations of the writers' works were not available, we actually created translations for the event so that people could follow along whatever language that they worked in. So, the thing about the writers that we work with in Latin America and here, like pretty much all of them, I would say all of them have published independently, whether that is publishing their own work themselves or with press projects or collectives. So like not only were we thinking about people who were doing that here in the US, but we were thinking about that tradition. I mean, there's just a long tradition of that in Latin America. And so, by using that curatorial platform, we were able to expand like the readership or the way people think about, what a Central American poetics is. It's not just here in New York with English speaking people, right? Like,
right.
I mean, it's also Latin America, and these things don't have to be separate. So that was really important to what we were doing. We just wanted to bring these community. We wanted to really create the community structure and have conversations built between, people who are in different places, and to really think, use that as a way of.
I feel like you've brought up something that's so important, and I think it's like such an interesting thing because it relates to like who goes to school, whether you need to go to school, whether school is a place that you learn what happens in the field, whether like that's a thing that you're continuously doing just from engaging, and actually like the idea of research as a part of just like human learning again and creative practice, and sort of like being, I had a conversation with a student about this recently, the sort of like difference between what you thought it meant to do the thing that what you thought being a writer meant. Are you, and I come also from the social sciences, so it's sort of like, in anthropology and social science where you've got a really problematics around this. It's sort of like, do you go in already deciding what you're going to find? Or do you go in willing to have what it means to be a writer be a different thing from the mythology that you had about what being a writer is before you got there? Did you already decide what the book was because you at 5 years old or you at 10 years old had a mythology about what the book does, right? And then you kind of come in and you're sort of like continuing to learn. Oh, actually, I'm capable of doing this. Oh, actually, books are doing this. Oh, actually, there's a history, of people in my lineage, of people that I care about in other countries, right? And so, I mean, I think, the work that collective did, and I think for me, I didn't know going into starting like a project like the operating system. I wasn't like necessarily thinking that we were going to do translation.
Yeah.
But when you ask the question of what is needed, if you actually look for an answer, you may find yourself doing different things than you expected based on the actual sort of like responses and needs and sort of emerging things in the community. And so I think I've really enjoyed watching your practice and your sort of being in the world continue to morph, right? Mm-hmm. That openness is really exciting and I think really necessary.
Yeah.
Right now, right? Did you want to talk about any specific projects or?
I mean, the main thing I wanted to talk about was the curatorial work. I mean, another thing that we're going to be doing, hopefully in the near future, is having translation workshops for, Anglophone Central American, like for lack of a better phrase, English-speaking Central American writers to just like work their translation chops and actually translate the work of, fellow contemporary writers in Latin America. So yeah, that's like a whole other frontier. I don't like the word frontier, but for lack of a better word, like that's a whole other horizon project for us, maybe relevant to these ideas. And the other thing we're doing is we're making a film about an independent book project, an anthology of Salvadoran American writing called Izote Voz that was published in 2000. So yeah, just thinking about, when we think about indie publishing and small scale publishing and the afterlives of it and just the different possibilities. I mean, these are the kind of book adjacent things that we do in the collective.
For sure. I mean, and I do think like any of that work across cultures and across languages is actually like so profound and has such a substantial impact. And again, like when you think about the sort of combination of like, let's do transnational projects, let's get literature into the United States. I mean, these numbers, which maybe are familiar to people in publishing, but not otherwise, like, or people in literature, like, I think it still stands at less than 3% of what's published every year in the United States is in translation from other languages, which is wild, given the capacity to have translated work. And then I think it's less than 1% is actually like creative things. Like it's like 3% is like anything, including like business books. And then like really this tiny, tiny percentage is work from other worlds. And so when we're talking about, like a decolonized education, a decolonized mind, like moving beyond the sort of supremacy of certain types of text or certain stories or certain awareness, we're knowing those numbers and realizing that, again, your authorship, your role could be to take on small publishing projects and do translation.
Yeah.
Or bring in translators, right? So part of it is also not even realizing like, you may not be a translator, but maybe you can facilitate something happening, right?
Right.
So the skills of becoming someone who knows how to design or knows how to publish and might be able to help someone else do that. And then getting it in your local library, right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Well, I don't know. I can't see who's in our audience, but.
Yeah, no, exactly. So Eve is manning the desk there. And so you can open up for questions if anyone has them, for sure, in the live chat. Mariam and I are in webinar mode. We are in a white box. We have no idea who's out there, but we appreciate you, phantom people. And we will just keep talking unless Eve puts something in the chat for us. I know that we wanted to talk a little bit just sort of about kind of like the importance that, you know, the role that like libraries have played in these sort of, you know, this sort of uncertain times of kind of, you know, even I was looking at the numbers of how many, there's more books being banned in the United States right now than ever before. There's more requests for banning things than have ever been had. And the Queens Public Library, which is in keeping with the rest of the New York Public Library, just celebrated Banned Books Week in October. And Queens Public Library has been really incredible, as have the rest of the New York Public Library branches, and really supporting making sure that these banned books are available to people, even to the extent of making them available digitally for people to get New York, Queens, Brooklyn Public Library cards from elsewhere. You know, and so I think in terms of the relationship between, you know, the idea of collective archiving projects, community initiatives, like against this wave, this tide of censorship, right, and of disinformation and misinformation, like, you know, how would you want to add anything there, like of what we feel? You want to speak to that a little bit?
I might speak to it indirectly, because I mean, I feel like maybe the censorship matter came up for me, and then my mind started going in a different direction. I guess the thing I immediately think of is, again, I'm veering from your question, but thinking back to what I was just saying, you know, when I think about what the possibility of translating, and on this small scale even, right, like, and then maybe making a chapbook or a small press book, translating the work of contemporary writers who are in political situations of crisis, that can be incredibly powerful, I think, in expanding audience. And like, oftentimes these are people who are also maybe, if not experiencing direct censorship in their home countries, they might not be able to say, you know, speak as widely. And there's something about bringing their work into another language that I think expands the platform. So I guess that's an adjacent thought that I'm having to the.
No, it's not. That was exactly what I was trying to do, was to tie it back to what we had just been saying, because I think that, you know, I think that's something that both of us have been really committed to and interested in, sort of like,
yeah,
eking out as a practice, is sort of, you know, and I think, I mean, and Miriam and I are both involved in scholarship, but something that you really recognize if you look back historically at actually what makes it through, it's not often the bestseller.
No.
It's the small thing that someone kept or someone archived, or that went into a library, or that someone taught, or that ended up in a school collection, or these little things that make it through, you know, resistance communities, artistic communities, the kind of thing that we did in Liminal Lab, or that now Miriam's doing on her own, or that I sometimes do on my own. These workshops become things like in the history that changes the course of history in a way, right? So when we give voice to international people in particular who are being repressed in their own countries, and, you know, we published Ashraf Fayyad's book that he was jailed for apostasy, for, you know, and it was the first time it was in English. I mean, and there's a number of books in the Operating System collection that have things like that. We published the first book, like, from the Faroe Islands. In Faroese, it just kind of, you know, I mean, that there's these voices that are, you know, are repressed in their home countries, are from cultures of silence. That's true in the Faroe Islands. There was, in that book, there was a lot about sort of like abuse, which is like never talked about, really hidden in that culture, you know, and making a platform for that and putting it in the archive is unbelievably valuable, and any individual person can do that. I think that's part of the, you know, what Miriam and I are both kind of saying, and I think that it's a thing that's become plastic and possible for us.
Yeah.
And once you realize that it's possible for you, you kind of can't pretend that it's not.
Yeah.
I mean, and that for me, like with my students, that's what Archive and Access is about, right? And so, we're really trying to get the work that we're doing outside of the classroom and have it be like, this is not an abstract idea, right?
Yeah.
So as things have come up in the world that they're challenged by, that fellow students are confused about, instead of like just going along in our semester, we're making materials, we're making libraries for other people, because you have the capacity as just a human to be an information worker, right? To make meaning for each other, and learning even the most simple tools of sort of making your own book, whether you're using self-publishing technologies that are now available. And I think it's funny because like people will really be like, oh, AI is terrible. Yeah, but if you're poor and have 3 jobs and you can figure out how to get AI lay out your book for you, I'm like, fantastic, great job. Is it free? If you're not a person who could hire someone, I do not have a problem with that. In fact, if it gets your voice out there, right? Maybe you disagree with me on that, but I'm all for it. If you can't hire a team and you can have a machine do it for you, then fantastic. Maybe it can do it for you while you're at work.
Why not?
Too much. Well, we have 3 more minutes. I'm so glad that you were willing to join me on this conversational journey this evening. Any last thoughts to add?
I mean, I would just say, if you want to, there's no limit to how you can call yourself a writer or an author. An author is somebody who publishes something, excuse me, that can mean, and the definition of that is pretty expansive. So yeah, if you want to be an author, you can do it. And if you want to experiment with doing these kinds of things, you can do it. You just got to be creative about it.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And, I, for many years, have been dedicated to sort of like making tools for people to do that. And so some of those are already up on the operating system, like within the Open Resource Hub, where there are also all sorts of people's resistance resources for different social justice movements that you can learn about. But there's also all sorts of like make your own book, design your own book, learn how to use, you learn how to use InDesign, but also like how to market yourself. Real brass tacks stuff is there. So please avail yourself of that. And I believe that, Eve has put all of those links in the chat. And so please use them. And he's putting some links about our work as well. And I think, this is a time where it's really easy to feel disheartened. Uncertain times, right? Uncertain times. But I think that these practices are full of potential and power.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, they're more important than ever.
They're more important than ever.
The virtual space and the commons, the public library as a commons, this is also more important than ever. And you should use those resources to keep hopeful.
Yeah, and realize how much those resources are available to you, often for almost no cost, right?
Yeah.
And so I often will say that the library is like one of the least risk spaces you can enter.
Yeah.
You can go and bring, take 200 things off the shelves. I mean, I'm not encouraging that. Sorry, librarians, but they want you to go look at 200 books, actually. Like, for what you could do with your day, going to the library and playing, take things down that you would never read. What do you have to lose? And there's so few things in our lives that are low risk like that. It's actually a joy. It's a joy. You can change your body by going to the library and remembering how much is there for you for free. Yeah. We like libraries. I don't know if you could tell. But we leave you with hope. Thank you for joining us today. That's solidarity, friends. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening.